Right. Settle down, everyone. Settle down, please. Welcome, KSLU Law students. Today, we're diving into an absolutely mandatory explainer on one of the most critical topics in your entire syllabus. I am your professor for today, and I expect absolute focus. Think of this explainer as your precise blackboard blueprint for a guaranteed 16-mark answer on the Transfer of Property Act. So take out your notebooks, get your pens ready. We are dissecting the doctrine of part performance under Section 53A, and I expect you to follow this structure exactly. Let's begin. Our agenda for today's lecture is as follows. 1. Introduction and meaning. 2. Essentials of Section 53A. 3. Effect and illustrations. 4. Indian versus English law. 5. Landmarked case laws. And finally, 6. Importance and conclusion. This is the exact skeleton of your answer script. Do not deviate from this sequence if you want maximum marks from the evaluator.
Section 1. Introduction and meaning. I want you to strictly center this heading right at the top of your answer sheet before we even begin dissecting the core statutory concept. Please write down the exact literature we are covering here. Doctrine of Part Performance, Section 53A. It is a shield, not a sword. It protects a transferee who has acted upon a contract, barring the transferor from enforcing inconsistent rights. Now, listen carefully to me. This is an equitable principle. Where a person contracts to transfer immovable property and the transferee has actually taken possession and performed his part, well, the law steps in to protect him even if the formal registration is incomplete. Now, I want you to explicitly underline the phrase, "it is a shield, not a sword," on your exam paper. In fact, underline it twice. This instantly captures the evaluator's attention, proving you understand that this right is purely defensive. You cannot file a suit to claim title using 53A. You can only use it to defend your existing possession. Moving on to Section 2. Essentials of Section 53A. The statutory requirements. Pay attention, because this is exactly where the bulk of your grading marks are concentrated. Copy these 6 essentials verbatim. 1. Existence of a valid contract. 2. Written and signed by the transferor. 3. Certainty of terms. 4. Possession taken or continued. 5. Act done in furtherance of contract. And 6. Transferee's willingness to perform. So the crucial point is this. Section 53A is a statutory right in India, which means it requires strict literal compliance. There absolutely must be a valid written contract signed by the transferor. Oral contracts, they simply do not qualify. The terms must be crystal clear. The transferee must have taken possession, or if they were already in possession, continued it, and importantly, done some act like paying in advance just to further the contract. Finally, pay close attention to the 6th point. Skipping this essential in your exam paper will literally ruin your score. The transferee must be absolutely ready and willing to perform their remaining obligations. If they refuse to pay the balance amount, equity is not going to protect them. Section 3. Effect and illustrations. Create a subheading for practical illustrations on your script to demonstrate absolute conceptual clarity to the examiner. Read these carefully. Illustration 1. Written contract to sell plus buyer pays price and takes possession equals protected under Section 53A. Buyer can defend possession. Versus Illustration 2. Oral permission to enter land plus no written contract equals not protected. Doctrine strictly not applicable. And this brilliantly illustrates the strict statutory bounds of Indian law. In the first scenario, because we have a written document and an act in furtherance, the buyer can physically block the seller from evicting him even if that sale deed isn't registered yet. But look at the second scenario. The oral nature of the agreement completely strips away all equitable defense. Make sure you remind the evaluator right here that Section 53A only defends possession. It strictly does not confer legal ownership or title. Section 4. Indian versus English law. Prepare to draw a strict comparative table on your exam scripts. This is a guaranteed technique to impress a strict KSLU evaluator. Let's read this table row by row. Basis, nature. Indian law is statutory under Section 53A. English law is an equitable doctrine. Basis, use. Indian law is defense only, acting as a shield. English law can actually be used as a cause of action. Basis, writing requirement. Indian law makes it mandatory. English law, well, it was not strictly required earlier. Basis, scope. Indian law is limited. English law has a wider application. Basis, registration impact. Indian law is affected by Registration Act amendments. English law has no such statutory restriction. You must clearly explain these jurisdictional differences. Note exactly how Indian law, by codifying this into a statute, made the writing requirement absolutely mandatory. This makes the Indian doctrine narrower in scope compared to the wider, flexible English equity, but it is significantly more certain and much less prone to fraudulent oral claims.
Section 5. Landmark Case Laws. I need your absolute attention here. A law answer without relevant judicial precedents is like a body without a skeleton. Citing these authorities elevates an average paper to a top-tier score.
Let's read the precedent. Mohan Lal v. Mirza Abdul Ghaffar. The doctrine of par performance can be used only as a defense, establishing its nature as a shield, not a sword. Okay, let's dive into this. Write this case law in a separate box format on your paper. Underline the case name to immediately capture the KSLU evaluator's attention for that 16-mark answer. The brief facts here are that the appellant tried to claim rights over a property based on an unregistered agreement of sale and actually sought to injunct the actual owner from interfering. The Supreme Court's ratio decidendi, the final verdict, was completely unequivocal. The court held that a transferee cannot use Section 53A to create a title or as an offensive weapon to assert ownership rights in a suit. The absolute relevance of this case is that it permanently cemented the jurisprudence that Section 53A operates strictly in a passive, defensive capacity.
Let's look at the next critical authority, Nathulal v. Fulchand. The Supreme Court emphasized the absolute readiness and willingness of the transferee to perform his part of the obligations. Now, what's really interesting about this precedent is how it strictly enforces the sixth essential of the doctrine. Box this case name as well on your script. The brief facts: Fulchand, the buyer, paid a portion of the price and was put in possession. However, Nathulal, the seller, failed to clear the property's title as agreed, which was absolutely necessary before the final payment could be made. When Nathulal tried to evict Fulchand, claiming unpaid dues, the Supreme Court delivered its verdict firmly in favor of the buyer. The ratio decidendi established that Fulchand was legally ready and willing to perform his part, but his performance was rightly contingent on the seller fulfilling his prior obligations. The absolute relevance of this case, it explicitly defines what willingness means under Section 53A. It is an absolute prerequisite to claim the equitable shield, provided, of course, the other party hasn't obstructed that performance.
Section 6. Importance and conclusion. Write your final concluding heading now. Do not abruptly end your legal analysis. Neatly wrap it up for full marks. Let's read these final bullet points aloud. Prevents fraud and injustice. Protects the bona fide transferee. Ensures absolute fairness in property transactions. Balances formal legal requirements with equity. I want you to dictate this exact structure as your mandatory concluding paragraph. Summarize for the evaluator exactly how the doctrine serves as a vital safeguard. It protects a bona fide, honest transferee who has paid their hard-earned money and taken possession from being utterly exploited by a cunning transferor who tries to use a technical loophole, like a lack of formal registration, to just throw them out on the street. I want to conclude this explainer with a strict academic reflection. Does the statutory strictness of Indian law under Section 53A provide better justice, or does it merely create an inflexible barrier compared to English equitable flexibility? I highly recommend you write a brief 2-line personal analysis on this in your conclusion to show the evaluator your independent critical thinking. I leave you with this final provocative question to ponder as you finalize your rigorous TPA exam preparation. Study hard, stick perfectly to the blueprint provided today, and class is dismissed.